Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I am a USA Today bestselling author of over 30 published novels and a high school English teacher. And on this week's episode, we have a Colorado author, Katherine Myrick, and we're going to be talking about her book, The Adventures of Scarlet of Arbalise, 250 years later, photographing the Dominguez Escalante Trail of 1776. Katherine, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, my name is Kathy Myrick, and as you already know, I'm a resident of Durango. I've lived here since 2004, so that's 21 years in the Southwest. And when I moved here, I knew nothing about the Four Corners area, and I was determined to educate myself. And the Dominguez Escalante Trail captured my attention early on.
Well, and it's interesting. We'll get into more of the history. But as I was going through and reading and seeing, like, those names do pop up in a lot of things in this area. And we'll get more into that. So tell us a little bit about what this book is and where it focuses, because it's really kind of a unique presentation of history and today.
Yes. When I moved to Durango, pretty soon after I moved here, I made an offer on a house on Escalante Drive. The house was under construction, and I knew nothing about Escalante. So I started asking questions, and one of my coworkers gave me a copy of the 1776 map that Escalante's expedition drew and published. And as it turns out, the expedition was said to have camped directly behind my soon-to-be new house on Escalante Drive on August 8th of 1776. I knew I was right in the middle of history. I was living in the middle of history, and with the map, I decided to start out and see how much of the trail I could follow. Very quickly, I realized I didn't want to do it all by myself, so I got a dog. And my Aussie, Scarlet, was born in Arbalise, which happens to be the location where Dominguez and Escalante crossed from New Mexico into Colorado on August 5th and 6th of 1776. So it was serendipitous that it should all come together. Scarlett and I had the map. I ordered Escalante's daily journal from Amazon. So with the map and the journal and my dog, I set out on my non-concert weekends to explore very remote areas of New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. The journey they took was 1,700 miles. It took 7 months. Because of my full-time working schedule with the San Juan Symphony, I wasn't able to do the whole trail at once. In fact, it took me about 15 years to photograph the trail in sections, section by section. And there I sat with almost 100,000 photos during the pandemic. And I had a lot of time. So I started going through my photos, and I realized I probably had a book, but I was still working full time. So I kind of put it on the back burner, but it was percolating in my mind for several years. I retired after the 2022 season, so 3 years ago. As soon as I retired, I got to work on the book. I had done most of the research through the journal. I verified it with, there were 5 other men in the last 100 years who had documented and published books on the trail. I didn't know of any other woman who had done it, so that further spurred me on to see if I could complete the trail on my own and write my own kind of book, which included photographs of mountains, monuments, waterways, and wildflowers, all of which are kind of my specialty. I'm a professional landscape photographer. I had it all. I just had to put it all together in the last couple of years. And I published last fall. The first printing sold out about a month ago, and I've just reprinted. So I have a new supply of books, and I'm visiting independent bookstores all along the trail,
Including here in Farmington. You want to mention that, and I'll note that toward the end of the show again, but you have a signing scheduled with Quill & Quest bookstore here in Farmington. Do you have other signings scheduled in the area as well?
I have not at the moment in Farmington. I'm doing a book signing at Maria's Bookshop tomorrow in Durango, and I have done talks in Arbalise and Silverton and Mancos and Cortez, in addition to Durango and Farmington. and then I'll be moving farther north following the trail. So my next stops are in Dolores, Montrose, and on up to northern Colorado.
So you get to interact with people who are living in some of the areas that the
Yes.
book takes place. So that's really cool.
And yes, and I interacted with a lot of people along the way when I was collecting information and taking photographs. So I'm really excited to go back to many of those places and let them know what became of the photographs that I was taking.
Yeah, I imagine some of those people, you interact with people just on your way doing something, and then to be able to come back
Mhm.
and see that end result. And that's a
Yes.
pretty cool experience.
Yes, it is.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your process for putting this all together. And I guess let's kind of start with, it's not just like your journal of your experience going along the trail with Scarlett. You have a combination of history as well as your experience, and you include a lot of other images. You have some maps, you have some poetry and other people's words, all kind of brought into this really complex format that
Mhm.
you've put all this information into. So tell us a little bit about how you started boiling down, I believe you said 15 years of working on this and doing the photographs, and starting to figure out how to put it together into a book for readers to learn more about the history as well as your journey.
I had 40 something different files of the campsites, the locations where they stopped. I had headed for those locations on my free weekends. So I had an Abiquiu file and an Arbalise file and a couple of different New Mexico files. And then I had a Scarlet file. So I initially never intended the book to be about a dog. But every time I set up my tripod in whatever remote location we were in, as soon as I got all set up, she was in the photo. She became my sidekick and my muse along the way. In the beginning of the book, there's a map. Well, they're very hard to read, but a couple of pages later, there's a map with red dashes that kind of look like footprints that outlines the trail. So I took those footprints, and out of those, I created text boxes on each page that describe what was happening in 1776 at that location. And then my goal was to draw in present day features. I was working with my 13-year-old grandson and wondering what questions he would be asking along the way, imagining a family road trip. And he's in the back seat looking at the book, and he doesn't understand. Why is the dirt red? Just simple questions like that. Or where did the name Mancus come from? So I continued to jot down those questions over the course of my writing and tried to take off on a few little tangents describing the history of the sunflowers in the Four Corners area and the red dirt and the different colors of rocks and the desert flowers and plants. I just tried to make it an overall so that it could be used as a road trip for a family. And that's how I imagined it initially. And I tried to write it at the level of a late middle school or young adult, high school student who would be able to access that information and get a lot of questions answered, both about the locations as they were in 1776 and as they are today, and what differences there might be now.
Yeah, and that was something that struck me. For one, the naming, that they would name each campsite that they went to, and how some of
Yeah.
those names have lasted into today, and some of them not as much. Some of them are really
Yes.
long, and so that would be a bit challenging today, but
They named some of them after themselves. When they picked up young Native American guides, and they picked up a number of stragglers throughout the journey, when they picked up young guides who decided to join them on the expedition or lead them to the next potential camp spot, they often named the guides after themselves. So it's a combination of naming after themselves and naming after saints.
yeah. When I had the question as I was reading, was were their names too hard to pronounce, or was that just kind of the custom of like, okay, well, here now is your Christian name that we're gonna go with instead.
Well, there wasn't really any custom. These guys established the customs because they were the first Spanish explorers to come into the Four Corners area and map the whole region. There had been some others that had gotten into New Mexico and into Hopi and Zuni territory, and a few that had come into Colorado and Utah but didn't make it any farther than that. The Colorado River was the huge challenge for all explorers during that time and even later up through the 1850s and the times of the old Spanish Trail. There were just very, very few places to cross the Colorados. That I read about so many times. I came across those challenges that I devoted a whole chapter to the Colorado River.
This is not the most accessible part of the country as far as going long distances. There's a lot of things that kind of get in the way, either, lack of resources for some areas where there's just no water, and then really some very rugged terrain that a lot of those early explorers really battled with. And their trip, they were originally trying to reach Monterey, California, right?
Yes.
And didn't quite make it there, but
No, but the Grand Canyon was the big obstacle there. There had been a couple of explorers who had figured out a way to get from California to Mexico by going south of the Grand Canyon, but there were very unfriendly Native Americans all along that trail. So this group was the first to try to find a northern route above the Grand Canyon that would get them then west to Monterey. They had no idea when they turned around that Monterey was still 500 miles away.
That's a long drive today, but that's
Yes,
a crazy amount to try to reach with just a small band of people in that time.
And the Sierra Nevadas and snow and, a lot of obstacles between here and there.
Well, and it's interesting because you point out at the beginning and then throughout that they were able to maintain pretty good relationships with the various Native American tribes that they met throughout their journeys. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, because partly they're spreading Christianity as they go through, but there's some of the history of that is not very friendly and has a lot of more negative history in certain parts. But they seemed to have really found a way to get along and build good relationships with people as they went along their way. Was there more information, like as far as how they approached it, or was it just their personalities and they were just nice people?
Well, maybe, but they were prepared. Another Spanish explorer, Juan Rivera, had covered part of the route as far north as the Gunnison River in 1765, 11 years earlier. So he brought back information. He had an impression of the Native Americans that he had come across, had an idea of where there were 7 different Ute tribes at the time. He had a relatively good idea of where those tribes were located, partly just from the conversations that he had had along the way. So they knew that food and tobacco and beads and knives would be well received. So they were prepared when they set off on their journey, and they had a whole chest of things to trade along the way. So they came with gifts, and in return, the native tribes were very friendly to them and offered, as far as I could tell, nobody turned them down to help with the guiding from one location to the next location. And the different tribes were located in different areas, and they were able to tell. The group of 10 men had a map maker and a couple of interpreters with them, and at least one of whom was part Native American. So they were able to communicate, and they had goods to trade. I guess that's the simple reason that it all went smoothly. They never encountered any unfriendly tribes. They heard about the Comanches that were farther north in Colorado than they dared to go. They knew that there might be unfriendly Indians up there. So when they got to Rangeley, Colorado, they turned west and crossed the Colorado River and Green River there, and then moved into Utah, where there were very friendly Laguna Utes near Utah Lake, who received them very warmly and welcomed them to come back and create a Spanish settlement for places that would have good water and good soil and be potential places to settle in the future.
Well, it's nice to see history in this area where someone comes in having prepared and with the mindset of having good relations and not just coming in with the conqueror mindset, which is so often happened in this area throughout time. It really makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. They were charged with trying to convert some of the Native Americans to Christianity, and they did talk about it, but they didn't push it. I read the journal word for word. If they were rebuffed, they just kept on walking. As it turns out, of all the people they met along the way, there was only one young Laguna Ute who joined the group. He wasn't more than 14 years old, according to the journal, and he was very friendly. He joined the group before Utah Lake on the Grand Mesa and accompanied them all the way back to Santa Fe. So he was baptized into the Catholic Church. That was the only one along the way. By that point, they knew that the Hopi would not be receptive to Christianity, so they didn't even try on this trip, on earlier trips that had been attempted. But it wasn't going to work, so they just let it go.
There's a complicated history with religious efforts in this area.
Everywhere.
Well, yeah, true. It gets really complicated in this area with the Native American tribes and that conquering aspect as far as religion and culture. There's been a few books I've encountered recently on that topic, so I was thinking about that as we were going through.
Well, I had previously written a book when I lived in Maryland on the colonial Anglican Church and its history in Maryland. And it was always said that Maryland was founded as a quote unquote Catholic colony. But when I dug into the research, it just turns out that of the 13 colonies, Maryland was the only one that did not believe in beheading the Catholics. Maryland let them live there undisturbed. They had to have ceremonies in basements unknown to the big world outside, but the religious toleration in this country is a total myth. There wasn't any as far back as the earliest colony. The Church of England was required when you moved here until 1776.
A book it's probably several months ago that I read for the show and talked with the author. I was surprised by that when you get the glossed over version of people coming to America in those early days, coming for religious freedom. And so you get this idea of oh yeah, well, everybody came and they did what they wanted with their belief system. And it was oh, actually, no, they really had to kind of hide if they were Catholic, particularly. They really had to hide their beliefs and practice in secret, even if they were in an area where, okay, well, we'll tolerate you. We'll let you come in and establish your lands, but keep it to yourself. I was oh, and I had no idea.
It's not taught. I taught some gifted and talented kids in summer programs for a number of years on Maryland's religious history. And I found one sentence in all the textbooks from K through 12 that mentioned anything about religion being part of Maryland's history, which was an eye-opener to me. It just wasn't in the textbooks. It was fascinating to research it.
We're in kind of a weird transition stage here where they're changing the requirements for graduation for high school, and they're removing New Mexico history from the high school level, so they'll only get it at middle school. And it's interesting because already so little is covered it's only a semester-long class now, not the full year. And it wasn't until I was in college that I took New Mexico history classes that I was oh my gosh, there's so much more to New Mexico history than I thought there was, and it's really interesting and just really fascinating stories. And you don't get that in 7th grade. You get, here's some dates, and they cover the basics of who came and when it happened and the wars that were fought and various things. It's really unfortunate that we don't get a deeper history earlier on, especially where you really can start to value the history of where you come from and the people who have created the state and the area that you live in, because it's such a complex process of the people who come in, the people who were already there, those histories clashing, and what comes out of that in the end. It's not a simple process at all, and I think it would be great if we understood that better.
I tried to draw in quite a bit of that in my book, not in great detail, but just enough to give young people in particular just what their appetites for, this is what was going on in Santa Fe in 1740. I never knew anything about that. I tried to highlight some things that had happened actually way back. There's some history of the ancestral Puebloans who lived in all the areas that these folks traveled through. So I tried to go back as far as I could with the history, and then the 1776 version of what was going on, and then present day. Tried to tie it all together in a simple way.
I think you accomplished that well. And the language is very accessible. Teaching high school, and a lot of my kids are reading at lower than a ninth grade level. I pay more attention to that now, just looking at, is this something I can add to my classroom library? Is it going to be too challenging? And this is one that I think a wide variety of ages and reading levels would find really interesting. And it does have a lot of pictures, which is great, especially of Scarlett. She's a gorgeous dog and looks like she's just a ton of fun to travel with.
I thought it made history a little more interesting. When all was
Absolutely.
said and done, it was like I watch people look, they sit down and look at the book, and then, they'll turn the page and all of a sudden there'd just be a huge smile, because they'll see this dog running through the snow. And I thought, oh, that's what I want. I love history, but not everybody does. I wanted to try to make it fun to learn.
She adds a great aspect of fun to it. And I was going to ask you, how did you go about choosing and narrowing down all of the photos that you had amassed, as well as the other graphics that you include in the book? Because that seems like that would be a tough process.
It was a tough process, but as a photographer, you always have favorite photos. A lot of those are in my inventory of photos that I have matted and framed and sold over the years. And then if there were photos of places that I wasn't terribly happy with, I was able to go back and photograph again. Actually, that piece wasn't very hard at all because I have my own favorites. So I was able to pull on them, and some of them I couldn't choose, so I made collages that had 8 desert flowers rather than just 1 or 2. The graphics are all taken off the monuments that I saw along the way. And that's a whole nother interesting story because most of the monuments were put up during the bicentennial in 1976 by the Bicentennial Commission. And you'll see them throughout all 4 states in the 4 corners. Some of them are still there, some of them are not. The ones that are still there, without exception, are riddled with bullet holes and graffiti. A lot of the sketches, like the one about prickly pear and pine nuts and some of the others, the monuments were typically a dark green marble with gold embossed, and the sketches of the men and the horses were embossed on top of the dark green. But there were so many bullet holes in a lot of the dark green monuments that I just reversed the pictures out. So I converted them to black and white, and then I inverted them. So the bullet holes in the background turned white, and the sketches, they look like black and white sketches now. But that's not what they looked like when I photographed them, but it was very difficult it was heartbreaking actually to look
That's really sad.
at all the monuments and imagine what they must have looked like. I reversed the colors, but I made them pristine, so they're back to the original look that was intended. But some of them are just gorgeous. Particularly, there's a whole group of monuments in the shape of a cross in Montrose, right across the street from the new Ute Indian Museum, and which was a campsite. And they've converted the whole area across the street from the museum into an ethnobotany garden, and the Dominguez Escalante markers are the cornerstones of the garden. And most of the sketches came from there, and some of the wording that I used came from there as well.
It's unfortunate that people tend to be destructive like that.
Yeah.
But maybe at some point, some of those will get refinished or replaced as needed. But you do document a lot here, and this is something that people could take with them, as you mentioned, and follow along if they wanted to do something similar. And I also wanted to ask you, if someone wanted to do something similar of their own journey following something, they wanted to put together a similar style of book, what advice would you give them? I think so many of us take so many pictures and then they just, live on our phone forever. But this is a really cool way to share a journey that you've been on and you're learning. And I thought other people might be inspired to do something similar, and you might have some advice.
I was fortunate to have the journal. I had such detailed information on the trail, where they started every day, where they ended up every day. I had the advantage that previous people who have documented the trail did it before they had access to Google Earth. But now with Google Earth, I was able to plot the points, latitude and longitude of campsite, and then figure out exactly what path they would have taken to the campsite the next night in southern Colorado. So I don't have any advice because I had such good resources. I don't know that you could start just from nowhere or just from from a map writing the book, but I had the whole journal with the very detailed descriptions of every single arroyo along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of made it easy. The challenge was pulling it all together and then reading the books that 5 different men had written over the last 100 years and checking them against the original journal, and then coming to my own conclusions about exactly where they would have been and where that particular campsite would have been and what they would have seen. I went to the campsites, I could see what they were looking at. In particular, the one that always stands out to me is when they crossed the New Mexico-Colorado border, they camped just about 4 miles east of where Arbalise is now. And from the Piedra River, they could see the Chimney Rock. And then that's mentioned in the book. And a number of those landmarks are mentioned. The Navajo Mountain several times when they get into Utah, northern Arizona. Hesperus Mountain is mentioned. The La Plata is mentioned. So when I would go to the campsites, I would try to photograph what it is they were looking at when they were crossing the Mancos River or camped on the Dolores River or whatever.
And it really gives people a sense of, if they wanted to go visit some of these sites or follow the trail as you did, what they're going to see and what they can anticipate along the way, which I think is a really fun aspect of this book.
And they could start anywhere on the trail. Every section kind of stands on its own. So if you were in Page, Arizona, you could figure out from my maps and my descriptions where it is that they crossed the Colorado River and then move into northern Arizona. They spent a lot of time trying to cross the Colorado River near Page, like 2 weeks.
Wow.
So I wanted to make it that I did the trail in sections, so I knew it could be done. And I tried to give it some continuity and include the maps so that you could start at any point along the way and really go in any direction.
Well, I hope people take a minute to check it out, and it gets them interested in learning a little bit more about the area and maybe going to visit some of them. So where can people find copies of the book and you, if they had any questions or just wanted to reach out?
Well, my website's pretty primitive, but it has all the basic information on it. It's thefifthcornerphotogallery.com. It's really just informational at this point. The book is available at Quill and Quest, at Maria's in Durango, Hand in Hand in Mancos, at the Cortez Cultural Center, and at Henry Smith's Gifts in Silverton. As time goes on, between now and next summer, I hope to visit all of the locations that they stopped and wrote about. So Montrose, Delta, up to Grand Junction in that area, up to Rangeley, over to Utah, Lake, near Bryce and Zion. So I hope I can get the book over there. It's actually at the Chimney Rock National Monument now. I'd like to see if I can get it into the Canyon of the Ancients National Monument, because they actually mention the pueblo that they saw there, the ancient ruin, which is now named Escalante Pueblo and looks directly over the Sleeping Ute. There's just so much history right there when you stand there and look at it, because that pueblo was built in 900 AD, and then Dominguez and Escalante came across it in 1776, and now it's been restored and it's part of the official exhibits at the Canyon of the Ancients Visitor Center.
And you have a book signing coming up with Quill and Quest, and that's
Yes.
going to be June 6th.
It's the first Friday art walk. I'll be at Quill and Quest signing books from 5 to 8 p.m.
People can find you online and come to the signing. And it sounds like you'll have quite a few things over the next year in the area that people might be able to make contact and chat with you about your journey.
I welcome any inquiries. I would love to inspire somebody else to follow the trail. It was just an incredible experience from beginning to end, a lot of chapters of it, and it took a long time, but I'm thrilled with the results.
Well, I hope it does inspire people. And we are out of time, but I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to share your book and come on the show to tell us a little bit more about your journey and your work.